This story is titled, "My Sister Destroyed My Small Business Because I Wouldn't Hire Her Unemployed Husband. Then She Lost Everything When His Secret Second Family Was Exposed." It's strange how life can change in an instant. One day you're running a successful small business that you've built from the ground up, and the next, you're watching it crumble because of family drama and a vindictive sister who couldn't take no for an answer. But karma has a way of catching up to people, and what happened next shocked our entire family to its core. I'm Emily, 34F, and until 6 months ago, I owned a thriving boutique bakery in a cozy town just outside of Portland, Oregon. I started Sweet Dreams Bakery 5 years ago with nothing but my grandmother's recipes and a small loan from my savings. Through countless sleepless nights and an unwavering dedication to quality, I built it into something special. My regular customers became like family, and I had finally started making enough profit to consider opening a second location. Before everything fell apart, I lived a pretty peaceful life. My husband Mark, 36M, worked as a high school teacher, and we had a comfortable routine. My older sister Rachel, 38F, and I used to be close. We'd have weekly family dinners, share holidays, and she was even my maid of honor at my wedding 3 years ago. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs and how she always seemed to resent my success, making little comments about how lucky I was, while she struggled to maintain her real estate career. The trouble started when Rachel's husband, Tom, 41M, lost his job at a local construction company. He'd been there for 15 years, and according to Rachel, the layoff came out of nowhere. But there was something about the way she avoided eye contact when talking about it that made me wonder if there was more to the story. Tom had always been different, charming on the surface, but there was an underlying arrogance that made me uncomfortable. He'd show up to family gatherings in expensive clothes and driving luxury cars, even though Rachel often complained about their mounting debt. I didn't know it then, but that job loss would trigger a chain of events that would not only destroy my business but also uncover secrets that would tear our family apart. And it all started with a simple request that I couldn't and wouldn't agree to. Little did I know that my sister's desperate attempt to help her husband would lead to the exposure of a double life that none of us could have imagined. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when Rachel showed up at my bakery unannounced. I was in the middle of preparing for a big wedding order, 50 custom cupcakes and a 3-tier cake that needed to be perfect. The moment I saw her expression, I knew something was wrong. She looked desperate, with dark circles under her eyes and that nervous energy she got when she was about to ask for something significant. That's when Rachel dropped the bomb. She wanted me to hire Tom as my bakery's manager. According to her, his business experience would help me expand faster, and it would be a win-win for everyone. But I knew better. Tom had never worked in food service, and his idea of management was bossing people around. More importantly, there were rumors about why he'd really lost his job, whispers about missing funds and angry clients that Rachel always dismissed as jealous gossip. I tried to let her down gently, explaining that I couldn't afford another full-time employee right now, especially not in a management position. But Rachel wouldn't take no for an answer. She kept pushing, saying I owed her for all the times she'd helped me in the past. When I stood firm, her desperate pleading turned to anger. She brought up old childhood grievances, accused me of always being our parents' favorite, and said I was selfish for not helping family in need. What she said next made my blood run cold. If I wouldn't help Tom, she would make sure everyone knew the truth about my business. She claimed she had evidence that I'd stolen our grandmother's recipes, that they were rightfully hers since she was the oldest. It was completely false. Gran had specifically left her recipe book to me because I was the only one who'd shown any interest in baking. But Rachel was beyond reason at this point. I asked her to leave, and the look she gave me sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just anger, it was pure hatred. As she stormed out, she knocked over a tray of freshly decorated cupcakes. The sight of them smashed on the floor was like a preview of what was about to happen to everything I'd built. The next few weeks were like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Negative reviews started appearing online, clearly fake accounts claiming food poisoning, describing horrible customer service, and even suggesting they'd found bugs in their orders. Local Facebook groups were suddenly filled with posts warning people about my unsanitary kitchen. Someone even reported me to the health department, forcing me to deal with surprise inspections that disrupted business. But the worst part? Rachel started showing up at local farmers markets and craft fairs where I usually sold my goods. She'd set up a booth right next to my regular spot, selling mediocre store-bought baked goods while telling everyone who would listen about how I'd stolen her inheritance. She even had the nerve to use a variation of my business name, Sweeter Dreams Bakery, claiming she was the original and I was the copycat. I was losing customers daily, and my reputation was being shredded. Mark suggested legal action, but Rachel was careful to stay just on the right side of the law. Besides, who would believe this level of pettiness from a sister? It seemed too absurd to be real. What I didn't know then was that Rachel's desperate behavior wasn't just about Tom's unemployment. She was trying to create a safety net because she'd started to notice things that didn't add up about her husband's life. Strange phone calls, unexplained absences, bills from places she'd never been. But I was too caught up in trying to save my business to see that my sister was actually crying out for help in the worst possible way. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my childhood friend Ashley, 35F, walked into my bakery one quiet afternoon. She lived 2 hours away in Seattle and wasn't someone I expected to see on a random Wednesday. The moment I saw her face, I knew she hadn't come for my famous chocolate croissants. Ashley worked as a wedding planner, and she'd been putting together what she called her dream event at a luxurious venue in Seattle. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking, and showed me a photo that made my world spin. There was Tom, dressed in an expensive suit, sampling wedding cakes with a pregnant woman who was definitely not my sister. According to Ashley, he'd introduced himself as Thomas Mitchell, not Thompson, the last name we all knew him by, a successful business consultant who was excitedly planning his first wedding. His first wedding. My mind raced back to all the business trips Tom claimed to take, the late-night calls he'd excuse himself to take outside, and the way he always seemed to have money despite being unemployed. Everything started clicking into place like a horrifying puzzle. He hadn't lost his job. He'd been dividing his time between two lives, and his employer had probably caught on to something. I spent that night tossing and turning, debating what to do with this information. Rachel had been systematically destroying my business and reputation for weeks, but she was still my sister. Finding out about Tom's double life would devastate her, especially now when she was already struggling. Mark suggested gathering more evidence before saying anything, but fate had other plans. The next morning, I arrived at my bakery to find the windows covered in paper printouts. Rachel had plastered the storefront with copies of our grandmother's handwritten recipe cards, along with a large sign claiming I'd stolen them from her. As I stood there, trying to peel off the papers before any customers could see them, my phone buzzed with a notification. Rachel had posted a lengthy rant in our town's community Facebook group, not just about the recipes now, but claiming I'd sabotaged her own attempt to start a bakery years ago. It was a complete fabrication. Rachel had never shown any interest in baking until she started her vendetta against me. But watching her spiral into these elaborate lies made me realize something. She must have been sensing that her life was built on an even bigger lie. In her desperate attempt to control something, anything, she'd chosen to destroy what I had. I was about to call Ashley to get more details about Tom's wedding when I received an unexpected message from someone named Lauren, 32F. She introduced herself as Tom's fiancée, and she wanted to order her wedding cake from my bakery, the same bakery her future husband's sister-in-law owned. The message was friendly and excited, clearly showing she had no idea about Tom's existing marriage to Rachel. My hands were shaking as I read her message. She'd found my bakery through a wedding planning website and had no clue about the connection. The irony was almost too much to bear. While Rachel was out there trying to ruin my business because I wouldn't hire her unemployed husband, that same husband was planning an elaborate wedding with another woman. But the real shock came when Lauren mentioned something that made my blood run cold. She and Tom had a 5-year-old daughter together, and they were expecting their second child. This wasn't just an affair. This was a whole other life, running parallel to the one we all thought we knew, for longer than Tom and Rachel had even been married. I sat in my empty bakery, surrounded by the mess of Rachel's latest attack, holding evidence that would shatter what remained of my sister's world. The question wasn't just about whether to tell her anymore. It was about how to tell her before she discovered it in an even more devastating way. Because with a wedding being planned and a baby on the way, the truth was going to come out one way or another. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. The morning after I received Lauren's wedding cake inquiry, Rachel launched her biggest attack yet. She somehow got hold of my client list and started calling them one by one, telling them that my bakery was closing down and offering her superior services instead. 3 wedding orders canceled within hours. My heart sank as I watched years of hard work crumbling because of her vindictive campaign. I had spent the night creating a folder of evidence about Tom's double life, screenshots of Lauren's messages, the photos Ashley had taken, and some social media posts I'd found of Tom with his other family under his fake name. Every time I thought about showing it to Rachel, I felt physically sick. How do you tell your sister that while she's been destroying your business to protect her husband, that same husband has been planning a wedding with another woman? But what happened next forced my hand. My mother called in tears, saying Rachel had shown up at her house with what she claimed was proof that I'd been embezzling money from our grandmother's estate before she died. It was an absolutely ridiculous accusation, granted barely enough to cover her nursing home expenses in her final years. But Rachel had created elaborate fake bank statements and was threatening to go to the police. That's when I realized that Tom wasn't just letting Rachel destroy my business. He was actively encouraging her vendetta against me. It was the perfect distraction from his own suspicious behavior. Every time Rachel noticed something odd about his absences or unexplained expenses, he'd redirect her anger toward me. He was using my sister's trust and love as a weapon, not just against me, but to cover his tracks. I made the decision to tell her, but I wanted to do it privately, away from prying eyes. I texted Rachel asking to meet at our mother's house that evening, claiming I was ready to tell the truth about everything. She responded immediately, probably thinking she'd finally broken me. What I didn't expect was for Tom to show up with her. Looking back, I should have known he wouldn't let her meet me alone. He probably feared I'd discovered something. The moment they walked into our mother's living room, Tom's eyes locked onto the folder in my hands. I saw a flash of panic cross his face before he composed himself. My mother had sensed something big was about to happen and had called our Aunt Susan, 55F, for support. I was grateful for her presence. She had always been the family's voice of reason. As Rachel started in on her usual accusations about the recipes and the business, I noticed Tom checking his phone repeatedly, growing increasingly agitated. Then it happened. Lauren, obviously frustrated by Tom's failure to respond to her wedding planning messages, decided to take matters into her own hands. She tracked down Rachel's real estate office contact information and sent an email with their wedding plans attached, hoping to surprise her future sister-in-law with their cake choice from my bakery. The email notification popped up on Rachel's phone in the middle of her tirade about my supposed theft. I watched as her face changed from anger to confusion to horror as she read the message. Tom's face went completely white. Before he could stop her, Rachel opened the attachment, a detailed wedding itinerary featuring Thomas Mitchell and Lauren Parker's special day, complete with photos of them together, including one with their young daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered on the coffee table. I didn't need to say a word or show her my folder of evidence. The truth had revealed itself in the most brutal way possible. But what happened next showed me a side of my sister I never knew existed and made me realize that sometimes losing everything can lead to finding yourself again. What happened next will stay with me forever. Rachel, who had spent months spewing venom and accusations at me, transformed before our eyes. She turned to Tom with an eerie calmness that sent chills down my spine. Without raising her voice, she asked him how long he'd been living this lie. Tom started spinning excuses about business investments and financial troubles, claiming Lauren was just a client who'd become obsessed with him. But Rachel wasn't the same person who'd blindly accepted his excuses before. She opened her phone gallery and started scrolling through photos of the past 6 years of their marriage, pointing out every business trip and work conference that had mysteriously fallen on holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries. All those times he'd missed family events because of work emergencies, he'd been with his other family. Then Rachel revealed something that made even my heart break for her. She'd had a miscarriage 2 years ago, during what should have been their first pregnancy. Tom had been unreachable for hours that day, claiming he was stuck in meetings. Now we all realized he'd been at his daughter's 3rd birthday party with Lauren. Our mother was quietly crying. Aunt Susan had moved to sit beside Rachel, her hand on my sister's shoulder. I stood frozen, my folder of evidence now unnecessary in my hands. Tom kept trying to speak, but every time he opened his mouth, Rachel held up her hand, silently commanding him to stop. She pulled out a second phone from her purse, one I'd never seen before, and placed it on the coffee table. It was Tom's old phone that she'd found hidden in their garage last week. She'd been planning to confront him about it, but got distracted when he suggested I might be sabotaging their finances to avoid giving him a job. Now everything made horrible sense. His constant deflections, the suspicious job loss, the perpetual money troubles despite his seemingly successful career, it had all been a carefully constructed house of cards. Rachel turned to me then, and the look in her eyes nearly broke me. She started apologizing, not just for the recent attacks on my business, but for years of resentment and jealousy. She admitted that watching my success had made her feel like a failure, and Tom had expertly played into those insecurities. Every time she'd questioned their financial struggles despite his supposed high income, he'd pointed to my bakery as an example of what she could have had if she'd tried harder. Tom finally snapped, his charming facade cracking completely. He started yelling about how Rachel had driven him to seek happiness elsewhere, how her obsession with competing with me had pushed him away. But his words died in his throat as Rachel calmly pulled up her banking app and showed us all something that made Tom's face turn ashen: a record of every suspicious transaction she'd documented over the past 6 years, meticulously cataloged with dates and locations. My sister might have been blinded by love and manipulation, but she wasn't stupid. Deep down, she'd known something was wrong. She'd just been too scared to face it, finding it easier to channel her fears and frustrations into anger at me instead. But now, faced with undeniable proof of Tom's betrayal, she was transformed. The sister who had spent months trying to destroy my business was gone, replaced by someone I'd never seen before. Someone stronger and more clear-eyed than I'd ever given her credit for being. What she did next would not only change our lives forever, but would also lead to discoveries that would make Tom's double life seem almost innocent in comparison. As it turned out, juggling 2 families was just the tip of the iceberg, and Rachel's careful documentation was about to unravel more than just a marriage. Rachel's documentation turned out to be a weapon more powerful than any of her attacks on my bakery had been. As she scrolled through years of suspicious transactions, a pattern emerged that went far beyond supporting a second family. There were massive transfers to offshore accounts, purchases from luxury car dealerships that we'd never seen, and property investments in names we didn't recognize. That's when Tom made his fatal mistake. He lunged for Rachel's phone, desperate to delete the evidence. In doing so, he knocked over her purse, spilling its contents across our mother's floor. Among the scattered items was a USB drive that Tom immediately recognized. His face went from desperate to terrified in an instant. Rachel's voice was steady as she explained that she'd found it in his home office last month, hidden inside an old trophy. She'd made copies of everything on it before putting it back exactly where she found it. The drive contained records of what appeared to be a complex network of financial misdeeds at his construction company. Tom hadn't been laid off. He'd left suddenly when an internal audit started getting too close to his activities. Aunt Susan, who had been quietly observing until now, revealed that her friend in the DA's office had already received copies of everything. Rachel hadn't just been documenting her suspicions about their marriage, she'd been building a case. While she'd been orchestrating attacks on my bakery, she'd also been secretly working with a lawyer to understand the full scope of Tom's deceptions. Tom's confident facade finally crumbled completely. He started begging Rachel to delete everything, offering to tell Lauren the wedding was off, promising to make things right. But Rachel wasn't done. She pulled up her email and showed him one final message, sent just moments ago to his other fiancée, Lauren. It contained all the evidence of his marriage to Rachel, along with proof that the money he'd been lavishing on his second family had been obtained through questionable means. As Tom ran out of our mother's house in panic, Rachel turned to me with tears in her eyes. She confessed that she'd discovered much of Tom's deception weeks ago, but had been too ashamed to admit she'd been wrong about him. Instead, she'd channeled all her pain and humiliation into attacking my business, letting Tom manipulate her into believing I was somehow responsible for their problems. The next few hours were a blur of emotions and revelations. Rachel showed us years of journal entries documenting her growing suspicions, along with recordings of Tom's gaslighting attempts when she questioned their finances. She'd been gathering evidence while simultaneously trying to deny the truth, letting Tom redirect her pain toward me because it was easier than facing reality. That evening, as we sat in my mother's kitchen sharing a bottle of wine, Rachel asked if she could see my grandmother's recipe book. Not to challenge my ownership this time, but to remember the happy times we'd spent watching Gran bake when we were kids. As she flipped through the worn pages, she found a note Gran had written years ago, tucked between the recipes. It read, "To my girls, remember that the sweetest things in life are the bonds we share. Love each other as much as you love these recipes." We both broke down then, really crying together for the first time since this nightmare began. Rachel swore she would spend the rest of her life making up for what she'd done to my business. But what happened next would prove that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to unexpected blessings, and that true sister bonds can survive even the most bitter ingredients life throws at us. 1 year has passed since that night in our mother's kitchen, and it's amazing how much can change in such a short time. Tom's web of lies unraveled spectacularly in the following weeks. Lauren, devastated by the revelations, turned out to be an unexpected ally. She reached out to Rachel, and the two women discovered they'd both been victims of Tom's manipulation. Together, their evidence ensured Tom would face consequences for his financial crimes. The damage to my bakery was severe, but sometimes destruction leads to unexpected opportunities. As part of her dedication to making amends, Rachel threw herself into helping me rebuild. She spent weekends personally visiting every client she'd contacted, explaining the truth and apologizing. To our surprise, many of them were moved by the story of sisterly reconciliation and return to the bakery. But the real turning point came from an unexpected source. Lauren, who'd built a successful event planning business in Seattle, proposed a collaboration. She'd been genuinely impressed with my portfolio before discovering the Tom connection, and she saw potential in combining our talents. With her connections and my baking skills, we expanded beyond wedding cakes into full-scale event catering. Rachel found her own path to healing and redemption. She sold their house, which turned out to be mostly paid for with embezzled money, and moved into a small apartment near my bakery. One day, while helping me fill orders, she discovered she had a natural talent for cake decoration. Those steady hands that had once been so good at real estate contracts created the most intricate sugar flowers I'd ever seen. 3 months ago, we officially became business partners. Sweet Dreams Bakery became Sisters Sweet Dreams, with Rachel handling the business side while I focus on recipes and baking. Her experience in real estate proved invaluable as we expanded to a larger location, and her eye for detail has helped us streamline operations in ways I never could have managed alone. Last week, we catered our first joint event with Lauren's company. As I watched Rachel expertly handling the delivery and setup, making sure every detail was perfect, I thought about how far we'd come. The sister who had once plastered my windows with accusations was now staying late to help me perfect new recipes, just like we used to do in Grand's kitchen. The recipe book that caused so much conflict now sits proudly displayed in our new shop, open to Grand's note about sisterly bonds. We've added our own notes in the margins, creating new memories alongside the old ones. Rachel's daughter Jessica, 8F, who spends afternoons doing homework in the bakery, has already started asking when she can learn to bake like her mom and aunt. Tom's trial is next month, and both Rachel and Lauren will testify. But that's no longer the center of our story. Yesterday, Rachel confessed something that made me cry. She'd found her calling. The joy she gets from creating beautiful decorations for others' special moments has healed something in her that Tom's betrayal had broken. Our mother jokes that Gran knew what she was doing when she left me that recipe book. She says Gran always believed food had the power to heal wounds and bring people together. Looking at our thriving business, our strengthened family bonds, and the unexpected friendships we formed, I think Gran was right. The irony isn't lost on us that Tom's attempts to destroy my business ended up making it stronger than ever. Our new location is doing triple the business of my old shop, and we've been featured in several wedding magazines. But the sweetest success isn't measured in profits or publicity, it's in the sound of Rachel's laughter in the kitchen, the sight of Jessica practicing her frosting techniques, and the knowledge that even the most bitter ingredients can sometimes make the most beautiful cake. Last night, as we were closing up the shop, Rachel found another note tucked in Gran's recipe book, one we'd never noticed before. It simply said, "The secret ingredient is forgiveness." As we stood there, covered in flour and frosting after a busy day, we realized that Gran had given us the most important recipe of all, one for healing, growth, and the unbreakable bonds of sisterhood.